Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Thank you for joining us for the Practical Preservation Podcast. We're trying something different today. We're answering your questions, maintenance related. So I have Jonathan with me, and we're going to answer the questions that were submitted. In my head, I keep thinking, you've got questions, we've got answers, but I think Radio Shack had that trademarked.
Most likely.
So the first question we have, or the first two, I guess, are related to water infiltration. So the one is about filled stone construction, masonry, and water influx and mitigation. The person that wrote in the question said, we struggle with water influx as a filled stone bank house. Water's running down the mountain, has plenty of spaces to find a way into the house. And the other question that is related was about plaster flaking off the walls, and typically that's a sign of moisture in the masonry also. So to deal with this, there's several different things that you can do. Usually when you see a stone house that's stuccoed on one side, that's because water has been getting in, usually through driven rain.
Yep, through the joints.
Through the masonry joints, and because the masonry is soft, the water travels through. So they would stucco to give another barrier. We have done that also in brick houses, but on the inside. So when a masonry house is constructed, it's usually just the brick or stone wall, and then the plaster is done right on top of that. But so if you want to stop the water infiltration from getting into your plaster, you can stucco with a type S mortar, which is waterproof, and then plaster on top of that. So that's how we've dealt with it in a brick house, that they didn't want to stucco the outside. But for the water actually coming in either from the groundwater or not groundwater, but from the outside and wicking up, you can do a couple of different drainage systems.
One of them would be like a perimeter drain. It's where you could dig down into the ground right by your house, and you get a PVC pipe with the corrugated, the holes in it. You can put that down so any water coming up can get diverted away from the house. So you start at the highest end or the furthest part, and you have it gradually slope down. So however you do it, putting stone underneath it to get the angle right. And then pretty much you put the cloth. It's a cloth for garden.
The landscape cloth.
You put that down, and then you put some more. You put crushed stone over it so that it doesn't allow dirt and stuff to get in, but it still allows it to water to seep through and get to the pipes also. Then once you got that couple inches of that, then you can fill it back up with dirt, and grass seed on top or whatever. You just want to keep plants away from it. That way it doesn't grow up your house. It doesn't keep the moisture close to your house. And the other thing you would do then is also, it's landscaping, but near your house you want the ground to be higher at your house and gently slope away. That'll stop any water that's coming down it'll go back up, but it'll also force it back down and out
and away from the house,
almost like a trough. The only other way is if you're getting it in your basement is to do like a sump pump with the same type of drain around the edge, and that way if it's filling up in the basement, you can then pump it out, and you don't have to worry about it. It's all set on an automatic bobber and stuff. So
the other thing that we see often, especially like if you're in a colonial house that has a chair rail, below the chair rail, if you have plaster failing and it's a masonry building, oftentimes that is from the water wicking up from the ground and then getting in. So it's not from the driven rain. It's not necessarily from the storm water. It's just from the moisture. So you want to make sure your pointing is good so there isn't water infiltration. And if you're still having problems, the Type S mortar stucco solution on the interior below the plaster would be a good solution.
And while you're at it, you can stucco underneath the ground too. So if you're doing the outside drain systems, and it's just as easy at that point to stucco it and seal that also.
Yeah. So the second question that we received was about painting. So, and that's a question and discussion that we have oftentimes. So the person actually asked, they're refinishing, painting old repurposed wood. It's 50 to 100 years old. They're removing the old paint, stabilizing the existing paint, edge priming, and top coating. So I would say any paint, whether it's any paint job, whether it's historic or new, prep is key. If you don't prep
is 95% of a paint job. No matter what anybody says, that is exactly the truth, because the better you prep it, you get longer longevity out of it. And it looks like a better job. So it's basically really, prep is key for any type of painting or staining or whatever.
So you want to, in a historic building, though, you want to make sure you take lead paint into consideration. So any house built before 1978, we just assume has lead paint unless it's been removed, abated, and or I can't think of what the other word is. Tested. So we just make that assumption. We're very, very careful, around children under 6 and pregnant women, and you also though need to take precautions yourself. Although adults can absorb the lead, not absorb it, but their bodies can handle the lead a little bit better. You don't get the developmental issues,
and it also passes through the body, unlike some other chemicals.
Yeah, eventually, if you remove the exposure, your lead levels will go down.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that while you're following safe lead practices, and there are pointers on the EPA website, but you want to make sure that, while you're working with the lead, the clothes that you're wearing, the shoes that you have, stay in that area, or, you remove them immediately and wash them. You wash your hands and your face before you eat, drink, or smoke, is what we always tell the people that are stripping for us. Wash your hands,
and face.
And that really does minimize your exposure.
And if you don't want to worry about your clothes getting contaminated, you can always buy like the overalls, the gloves, and the booties and stuff like that. And then just tape around the areas where there's seams. Yeah, like around your wrist, around your ankles, and that'll help keep out any dust from your clothes, so you won't have that contamination coming in and out, or from home, or wherever you're doing it at.
And just be really careful where you're tracking it to. There's been 2 incidents that I've seen in the Lancaster paper where adults have had it on their clothes and weren't taking precautions, and then have caused lead poisoning in children. One was Trinity Lutheran Steeple. The painter was going home and not changing his clothes, and their small child, had lead poisoning. Another was a Plain family that were repurposing sash for like craft projects, and the entire family had really high lead levels. So just be mindful. That's the one thing about the older buildings. I did go to a presentation once where the the person did say lead paint saved America's woodwork because it didn't require it to be repainted, and it was but then you have the toxic side effects. So while you're painting or while you're preparing to paint, you want to make sure that your surface is clean, dry, sound, that any repairs that need to be made, and that use sand to make it so that something will grip to it. You don't have to strip all the paint. You can, and but you don't have to. And there's multiple ways that you can strip. You can use chemicals, which we're using more and more because of the lead exposure.
And it keeps it wet. So
yeah, it keeps
wet is the key.
Yeah. You can use heat guns, and that you need to wear a respirator when you're using heat guns.
Among other things.
Yeah, and be careful that you don't make the wood too hot. And there's sanding. Don't sand. That sanding's probably the worst thing that you can do.
Unless you're wet sanding.
Right. But sanding in general, because wet sanding will pull the grain up and not give you. There's a lot more prep steps, and the sanding just makes all the lead dust airborne, and it's a lot more it's a lot riskier, a lot risk, and it's more damaging to the wood. So after you've gotten yourself down to a sound surface and you're deciding to paint, typically we use a good oil-based primer and two finish coats. You can't buy oil. Well, you can buy oil-based paint. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the oil-based paint is very limited in America, so we don't use that as much anymore. So there are some options, though. So if you're painting masonry, and the rule of thumb of painting masonry is if it's been painted, paint it. If not, don't paint it. But you want to make sure you pick something that's breathable. So you want to pick either a mineral paint or a lime wash for painting your masonry. You can also, for traditional painting, you can choose milk paint, and you can use that on your exterior with additives, and there's a lot of different milk paint companies now. And then if you're looking for a good oil-based paint, you can get two that are out of Europe. One's Fine Paints of Europe. It's really touchy, but it's a good high quality thick paint.
Just make sure you read the directions every time on this to understand how it works and follow it to a T.
And they're very helpful. If you call into their technical helpline, they help. And then there's linseed oil paint. And in North America now, they're recommending adding zinc to it to prevent mildew growth. So we have a gallon of that I'm going to try out at our house, and we'll have some updates on how that worked. So then our last question had to do with wood repair and preservation. So typically for wood repair, we have either interior or exterior. We have two options. Because we're repairing, not replacing. Would either be a solid wood Dutchman, which is just removing the decayed part and putting new wood in, and then a consolidant and epoxy method.
The wood Dutchman, I mean, that's pretty much explanatory by what you said. It's literally removing the decayed wood, and the key to that is not making complete squares. You might want to make them octagon or skewed, just so that the grains don't line up, making a straight cut across a straight grain board. That's if you're staining it or something. In other words, it doesn't really matter as long as you get the grains the right direction, and so you're not getting end grains and stuff like that, and you can sand it out and repaint it.
Typically we use either a tropical hardwood or a salvaged wood, some old growth wood, because the new growth wood will not give you the longevity if you want something that's going to last, a repair that will last.
Yeah. And the other one was, what was it?
The epoxy and
repair
consolidant. Yeah.
And consolidant. Now this is one that everybody wants to fight over because they're not sure about it. Well, there's ways to view it, Yes, it changes the wood chemicals, especially when you're using the consolidant, because it rehardens back up some of the soft decaying stuff. we still remove the decayed stuff as much as you can. And if it's kind of soft, but it's still there, that's what you use the consolidant for. It'll stop it. It'll basically turn into like a plastic or a stone. And then from there, you can use different types of epoxies. Usually it's a 2-part A and B. You mix together, you fill it, and then let it sit and harden. And then you can sand it, shape it, carve it, whatever you want. You can even cut, almost all of them you can cut with a circular saw or a jigsaw or whatever. So, and then it's pretty much back to the painting and starting from there.
Yeah, typically we do, our rule of thumb is if it's less than 50% decayed or gone, we will repair it. If it's more than that, we'll replace the section, like if it's on a window, the mutton or the rail or the stile. But the epoxies are a good option for rebuilding something up. They're machinable and carvable. So, and once it's painted, it's not a good option if you're not painting, but once it's painted, it definitely does. You can't tell the difference between that and wood. There's a lot of different companies and a lot of different options for epoxies now. And I would just say, if you have questions, let us know. But we have a couple of different ones that we use depending on the application, and that's one of the things that I think is important. If you have the experience, then you know what works best in what situation.
But just stay away from the automotive epoxies.
Oh yeah, use the epoxies
Those
for
are
wood.
not good for wood because it's solid and it's made for metal. It's great if you're doing metal windows and trying to restore those, but for wood it doesn't flex and expand and contract with the wood, so it'll just crack, and I mean within months, and pretty much fall out. So
thank you for joining us for the Practical Preservation Podcast. Be sure to be on the lookout for our Practical Preservation event that we're planning for June 2nd at lancasterhistory.org. Those invitations will be coming out shortly. But if you'd like more information about that, please let us know. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.